So, picking up from where we were earlier when we were chatting about the specific challenges of metal music production, when it came to this particular project, what do you feel the central challenges of translating this song to the listener were?
I guess there were some technical challenges in terms of, because this is a joint project, a collaboration with files flying from all kinds of people. So I think that's maybe the one of the challenges, because some of these stuff here has been recorded by the artists themselves, and when you don't have that professional engineer, you will face some issues in terms of stuff being mixed into channels already and pre-processed bad edits and stuff like that. So I had to do quite a lot of stuff like that to begin with in terms of cleanup and things. And the next thing, I guess, was to try to make these, well, apart from creating the basic sound, which is always a challenge. It usually takes me like 2 days just to get the first song of an album, if you have like this defining sound of an album, which is usually the case. Usually takes me like 2 days to have ironed out everything and sort of feel happy. And then that sound also develops throughout the mix. So I would say that every time I mix an album, it gets a little better sounding than if I just mix one song, if that makes sense. Because you take that first song and use some of those elements as a starting point for the next one. That develops. Then you move into the third song and develop further. And then you might end the album mix by actually going back to the first songs that you mixed and try to enhance things or stuff that you picked up and learned along the way, so to speak. So that's, beyond that fact, this is a song that probably because of this whole theme of heaviness in music, it has some different sections, right? It's there are some blast beats with really fast kicks and everything, and then it's a little bit of a challenge to marry that with this slow part of the song that is halftime and really heavy, and to make that sound coherent and good. And vocal-wise, usually if there are heavy songs that just have the grunts, then it's a little easier to mix, to be honest, because then you don't have the pitch factor, and the words are a little easier to get. I don't know, maybe it's the distortion factor of the vocals, because basically when you sing with the grunts, you distort your voice, right? And you naturally have more harmonics that is easier to mix in a way. Whilst a clean vocal has fewer, has less information in the frequency range, and that makes it actually harder to get in somehow. And this is a lot of clean vocals and a lot of harmonies, and these harmonies by Ralph were recorded on without maybe a complete logic in terms of arrangement. So I had to spend some time breaking it up, recreating tracks to make them make sense. Like, this is low harmony 1, this is low harmony 2, this is low harmony 1 overdub, etc. So that has been some like arrangement work to make it work. So that's, I guess, some of the challenges here.
When we were chatting earlier, you spoke about this overall context with the distorted electric guitars, that's a really important factor. So would that be a good place to start with, having a look at your processing with this mix, have a look at what you looked at with the guitars processing wise and why you were doing that, and then just have a listen to what the differences are with your approach. Can I firstly ask, did you use double track or quad track guitars?
Well, the arrangement for this one is 4 guitars, and since they are at times playing pretty different things, I would either have to do like, let's say guitar, they are tracked in pairs. So guitar 1 and 2 are unison with each other, and guitar 3 and 4 are unison. So I would either have to do like guitar for example, 1 and 2 full left right, and then guitar 3 and 4 as support left and right. Or I could choose like 1 and 3 or 1 and 4, so that I would get both performances on the sides. But I chose to use all 4 here, since they are not playing the same thing and it was delivered that way, then I usually would do that. When it comes to actually producing or tracking, this is a decision, usually based around other elements. If there are mostly guitars in the arrangement, in terms of, let's say that there's a rhythm guitar driven song, then I think usually 4 guitars could sort of even out the differences or quirks in performances and make a heavier sound. And there's also a sound factor there. The fact that you have the ability to craft a little different sound that complements the main guitar pair, so to speak, that can be beneficial for the overall sound with having 4 guitars. That said, if I do an album that is very technical, let's say some thrash stuff where there's intricate picking and riffing, then I think it could sound just not as focused if you have 4 guitars. So in those cases, I might like choose just to have the 2 if they're good enough. But here it's a little bit sloppy, played here and there. I think the 4 guitars helps in evening out the performance to make it sound big instead of sloppy, if you know what I mean. Sloppy is a rough word here, but it's very well played, everything. But here I think it was beneficial to have all the 4 guitars. There are also many sections where the guitars are driving. There are no lead guitars. If there's an album with a lot of lead guitars, then that would sort of be a decision that I make, at least where there are lead guitars, like octaves or some melody or something. There I might leave out guitar 3 and 4 and just use 1 and 2. And if there are heavy parts that are focused around the rhythm guitars, I might use 4 guitars only on those sections. So it all comes down to the situation.
And have you gone entirely panned hard left and right with the 4 guitars, or is it slightly towed in slightly?
Yeah, I try to be not too subtle when it comes to panning, because if you start to overthink the panning too much, you will end up with a mix that feels a little narrow. Usually it is better to use the speakers for things, or the center. That said, I usually have some sort of rule and then I break it all the time, depending on how it needs to be. Because that could also feel unbalanced if you have like a single element somewhere, unless it's balanced with another single element on the other side, then it works fine. And this has also changed a little bit. I would say that when most people listened in speakers, I was a little bit more inclined to put stuff a little bit beyond the stereo field, if you know what I mean. Use stereo wideners and stuff to psychoacoustically put things beyond and make it sound bigger. But when you listen in headphones, I think that sounds really weird, especially if there would be one guitar on its own on one side and then you put it beyond. It sounds super weird to me in my head, listening in earbuds or headphones. So thinking about headphones, I would perhaps at least not go beyond the full stereo. I might do it on the full mix or frequency depending, like the highs a little bit wider than the lows, just to get a little bit more spatial sensation also in headphones. But focus-wise and on sections where there is like one single guitar, I always try to think about the headphone factor and not go full panned.
And have you processed the guitars on the individual channels or just the bus?
We can look at it. So what was delivered to me for this mix was a bunch of different options. I got the DIs, the clean signal directly from the guitar. which is sort of a standard these days that you also deliver that, because then you could reamp or put that signal into an amp on the mixing side of things and actually recreate the sound, which is a very handy thing. And I always do that, more or less, because it's such a, since these guitars are going to be there all the time and dictating the frequency response. If I get a sound in that I'm not fully happy with, I will just never stop mixing those guitars. So I usually prefer crafting my own guitar sound, and specific for the album. And when I'm happy with that, then I sort of leave it. I don't process it much more. Maybe there would be some time differences, and there could be differences between the sections, of course, and I might add delay also to the rhythm guitars and parts, which I have done on a few parts in this song. Yeah, it's that's one of these things that I usually do. Or if I get 4 guitars like I did here, I try to reamp guitar 1 and 2 and use whatever I got. Even if I think it's bad sounding, I could still use guitar 3 and 4 in addition, and that way I would also not end up with creating 2 similar sounds for every album that I do. So that way every album that I mix gets some sort of unique trademark that was brought in. And this can of course be sensitive. Sometimes the guitar players have a very specific idea of a guitar sound, and if I reamp that, then I might, take decisions that I'm not supposed to do. But I would say, statistically speaking, this is completely fine.
So in this mix, it was all 4 guitars were reamped?
No, I did keep the guitar 3 and 4. 6909 they're called,
yep.
USA, whatever that is. And the first ones were, let's see, these are the original tracks over here. I have, there were 5150, 2 versions of the 5150, I think.
Yeah, I did 2 slightly different sounds.
Yeah, and 6505 and Stealth.
Yeah. Which
was interesting, since I just, as you sent this to me, I had been working on a 5150 kind of plugin, so I had 5 of these just sitting here on my shelf. So I actually decided to reamp with the 5150 and the Stealth version of the EVH 5150 version 3 to get really technical. So I used the same kind of amps that I got, just that it's through my own cabinet, my own mic chain, and my own frequency space, or preference or whatever. And then I paired them together, and listening to isolated rhythm guitars is usually not so fun, because they are a result of being crafted into the mix. But we could listen to something. What do you want to hear? The chorus or the post-chorus, or?
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, and then there are some third harmonies here where I'm not completely done with this mix at this point. I'm probably gonna have to boost them up a little bit, and that's one of those points where I could choose to go left and right instead of supporting with guitar 3 and 4 as it is now. It depends a little bit on how important that third harmony is.
And could we just hear the 2 reamp guitars, just 1 and 2 on its own for a moment?
And then guitar 3 and 4.
Yeah, so as we were talking about earlier, this difference in the tone sort of filling in, 3 and 4 sort of filling in.
Yeah, exactly. And even though I can think that 3 and 4 may sound a little boxy and small, I think that it definitely gives a character to them, and I think altogether it sounds better than just listening to 1 and 2. So if we look at the processing side of things here, you can see that I have the 4 guitars. They are sending to a rhythm guitar, like summing bus that goes out to my summing mixer. I have this like hybrid setup here where I mix inside the computer, and then that goes analog into some stuff and then back in. But the guitars are processed only with these plugins. And of course also while reamping I have some other stuff in there as well. It's like a combination of 4 microphones, like a sum up EQ, some transformer, iron, and then back in to the system. If we look at this is the 5150 EQ. This is the EQ for the Stealth, and this is like a pretty typical way of EQing stuff that goes into a metal mix, where you basically have to get rid of some of the fundamental frequencies, like the root notes, or the first couple of harmonics usually builds up quite a lot, and the same thing will happen unless you are a perfectly arranged orchestra. These things will tend to build up, and then they're playing on the same note with those elements in the band and the mix, and then you would have to like find ways of not making those frequencies become too much in the sum of everything. So getting rid of some low mids and emphasize some highs or high mids is like pretty standard thing, and also something that I probably would use on the overall mix as well, not having to do that on every channel, if that makes sense.
Could we just have a listen to those guitars without the EQ? And is that
Sure.
Is that dynamic EQ following it?
No, this is just a static EQ that I'm putting on both. I use dynamic EQs and I use multiband stuff as well, but that would be specific to solve a task rather than a standard thing, because otherwise it could create more problems than it actually solves. But sure, let's see. Do you want to listen to the sum of them, like both of them?
Yeah.
I should say that there's also additional EQ here, defeating a little bit what I just did. No, it's the sum of everything. With all 3 of them, I have actually boosted a little bit low mids back into it at some point. That's sometimes how it goes, right? You craft something and then you feel like in the end, when everything, you come further in the mix, like maybe the whole guitar package needs to be a little bit, instead of going in on every channel that is the guitar package, you can just do it on the sum of everything. So if I would remove all of that, so in a way that sounds better to my ears, but then you put on the EQ that is a result of getting them into the mix. Not a huge difference, but it is a little thinner, a little more high focused. And like I said, if I would just be jamming, I would probably prefer just the raw sound there, you know. But then you get into the mix. If we listen to the guitar 3 and 4, in this case, I have done some EQ there as well. Here I also have a low cut that I felt that I needed to do. And there I'm using another method that's pretty common and almost standard these days. I don't think it should be standard. Most people use this as a standard thing without actually evaluating. But this is a thing where we find the fundamental frequencies and we compress that frequency depending. You can see that when these guitars are playing the palm mutes, this frequency depending compression that this is, it goes in and tames those palm mutes a little bit. And that's something that I felt that I wanted to do, but I chose to do it only on guitar 3 and 4 to get the, how should I say, the clarity of those palm mutes are also important, because if you have too much low end in your guitar sound, then probably you need to do that. If you have a very dynamic guitar sound, maybe a Mesa rectifier or something, or a diesel VH4 that are very dynamic in the low end, then you probably need to do this more. Then now I'm using a 5150, which is a more compressed guitar sound in a way. So I feel that I don't really need to tame them. It also depends on what microphones you used and all that, of course. But because sometimes you need that. You need it to feel those palm mutes. That's like that's another thing, by the way. If there's one element, if you would have to say, or if you ask me to, Jens, tell me one element that is heaviness in metal, then I would say palm mutes. Because that way, how you press the hand against the strings and then hit the strings, and it creates this sound, and you use it rhythmically, you use it percussively, and you use it to bring forth this low-end boost. Creates a lot of issues while mixing, but that's what all the riffing is all about, I know that for rock guitar, you usually say that the left hand is the most important, how you mute the strings and work with it. But in metal, it's definitely the palm mute and the right hand. That's always there. And sometimes you need to tame it. Sometimes you need to do the opposite. On some occasions where I got a guitar sound in and I thought it felt flat, I would flip this and just do like this instead, and it would actually emphasize every time the palm mute comes. So it all comes down to the situation.
And the other processing on guitars 3 and 4 ends?
On this one, I have a little bit more stuff on. I actually have a pretty severe EQ that I've matched to other guitar sounds I did in the past. And that was more to get them into a frequency spectrum that I felt that I was happy with, or that complemented the others, I should say. And then there is also this little prototype thing, a machine learning speaker dynamics processing that is creating some extra harmonics and making them a little bit more vivid.
Speaker dynamics processing, that's interesting.
Yeah, they sounded a little bit flat, maybe. And there's some additional EQ here. So it can be layers of stuff. I do try to have this rule that I fail all the time, that I try to not stack too much stuff. And sometimes when I come a little further in the mix, I sometimes go like this, in the mix, does this make sense? Can I bypass this? What happens if I do like this? And then I could clean up some processing stages and actually make the mix a little bit more alive and interesting that way. Sometimes that's also a case for drums. It felt like I needed to do something at some point on the drum bus, but then as the mix advanced and I got a little further in the crafting the overall frequency spectrum, maybe that tape thing that I had on the drums, how does it sound? Actually, it makes the snare pop if I remove it. Or it could be the opposite, of course. There are no rules in this game.
Could we just have a listen to the guitars with the speaker dynamic processing taken off? Is it on the guitar Some as well?
No, it's not.
No.
That's another thing I'm using. I'm using a parallel compression of a thing here with a little bit of stereo thing. This is very, it's just mixed in tiny into the guitar bus.
Yeah.
This would be crazy otherwise. It's just a thing that I chose to do for this, for vividness a little bit. And very specific. And with the speaker dynamic processing, it's gonna be too subtle to hear for people, I think. It's really on the subtle level. If you cannot hear the difference between an IR and the real amp, then you're not gonna catch it. But I might be using it quite a lot on that one, though. We can do like this. I can show you approximately how this is. And again, I've never listened to these solo isolated. Everything I do here is a result of what needs to happen inside the mix. So solo listen like this is, I don't even know what I did, Yeah, here you can hear this pretty scooped, really beefy thing. And I needed those guitar to complement the main ones, not by scooped low low end kind of things. I need like a pretty filtered sound. I needed them to come forth in the mids and give the tonal character more. So thinner sounding, but the place that they could have without going in and messing with the like main guitars. And all of that result also, like usually I would have the bass in as well when I listen to you can hear that there's a space for the bass in there as well.
And the last processor on your guitar, son?
You mean this one?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a different topic. This is very specific to the way I mix, but this has been used in various forms since the 80s at least. And it comes down to the vocals are always the most important thing. So if I go over to the vocal tracks over here, I am actually sending the lead vocal tracks onto like an auxiliary bus or send that I call the key bus. And then I use that key bus to trigger some compression or ducking on various elements of the mix. So every time the vocals is active, the rhythm guitars would dip down just a tiny bit. You know, you shouldn't be able to hear it. It's just be like psychoacoustically masking things and help the vocal come forth. And then when the vocals are gone, it doesn't sound like the mix is dropping, but the rest is like coming back a little bit on a very, very subtle level. I don't want it to sound like it's like moving or anything. I do tons of automation as well to, you know, do whatever I need. But instead of having to do that like around the vocal kind of automation that I feel is needed, then I'm using that sort of method. So on many of these 80s hit singles, you would sort of route all the instruments to one bus and put a compressor on that you sidechain from the vocals, and that way all the instrument ducked a little bit away as soon as the vocals were active, and then you mixed it in with the vocals post that compressor. I do that method, but instead of using it for everything, I usually don't want it to affect my drums, for example. And I want it to affect keyboards and lead guitars more than rhythm guitars, because rhythms are such an important thing as well, and usually not the bass. So that way I can place these duckers and sidechain them from the vocals wherever I need them. And I even use that key bus also for my delays. I have delay returns here for the vocals, and then I put a compressor that I key from the vocals itself. So as soon as the vocals is active, it would dim down the effects a little bit, and then the tails become a little louder. Yeah. So it's like subtle things that I wouldn't recommend anyone like getting into and think is too important, because that's not where the mix is happening, but it is maybe that last half a percent.
But certainly where the mix is happening here, and if you don't mind me saying, it's something that is common, I feel, to your mixes, is the bass sound. And again, with this mix, you've delivered a bass sound that not only works really well within the context of the guitars and obviously the drums, but it's got, you know, note definition and clarity while still having a really tight sound. And I'd love you to just have a listen to the bass with the guitars just one more time, and then just take us through your thoughts and processing approach with the bass.
Mm-hmm. Well, my main processing approach is that I never listen to the bass in solo. So doing this is a different concept that I'm used to, and might be weird. Like I might realize now that the bass sounds shit, but that's how it is. All right, so this is all together. So I guess what I usually try to do here is not listen to it solo like this. Of course, at the first evaluation step, like what kind of tracks do I have here? If it wasn't me recording them myself, and then I would try things. And in the vein of science that I try to sort of keep to, I usually create multiple bass sounds, and then I use whatever seems to fit. But it is paramount that I already have some sort of guitar sound. I never craft the bass sound second to drums and then try to get a guitar sound. I usually try to, same way as I record actually, I usually record drums first and then rhythm guitars. And then I craft a bass sound and also adapt the playing of the bass to the rhythm and also the tuning. The same way when I mix, I try to nail the drums and rhythm guitar sounds, sort of, or I use some sort of temporary bass sound just to get an idea of exactly how much low end I can have in my rhythm guitars. It's a constant back and forth, these things. And with the bass, I suppose my personal preference comes in here as well. I prefer if it's not a completely flatlined, super distorted bass sound. If it needs to be super distorted, if that's what the production or the band asks for, I would try to do it frequency depending. So the highs are more distorted than the lows, so to speak. So that way I can still have some dynamics and note clarity in the low end. However, if it gets too clean in the low end, maybe the note clarity will suffer. So when you interviewed me in the past, Mark, I showed you the technique of using the DI for the low end and then use the amp for the rest. I do that still from time to time, not on this particular project though. I thought the tracks that I got in sounded really good on the bass department. So what I have done is I've based it around this amp classic. I guess that's an SVT Ampeg. And that sounded really good. I have used some of this Dark Class plugin from what's the company called? I don't remember.
Dark Glass.
Oh, it is Dark Class. Yeah. Well, I guess it's Dark Class.
Yeah.
And for distortion, I think that pedal is very popular. I think it works maybe better as an addition than a main sound because it can create some little weirdness in terms of the tonal information. Some notes get a little lost. And that's something that I really listen for. When I try this into the mix, I listen to character. What's the distortion level? How can we work with the distortion to get it through? Is it even desired that there are distortion, like hearable distortion? Sometimes that's like the foundation of the heaviness, that you can hear that gnarly bass going. Sometimes it should take a little less focus. Also depends, how busy are the drums? Are there a lot of kick stuff all the time? I might want to try to get the bass a little bit more focused in the mids or high mids. If there's a lot of space in the low end, then I want my bass to sort of fill that space. So all of that sort of happens without me thinking about it. It's just adapting to the situation. For some songs, I might even have 3 different bass sounds in the same song, depending on these things. For some reason, people always create the most complex albums and come to me for mixing them. And then there could be a lot of those things, like even fretless or finger playing in one section, and then you have the heavy stuff played with a pick, and yeah. But when I listen to the bass, like I said, character is one thing, and the other thing that is also very important when I sort of select the gear to use, or the amp to use, or the mic to use, or the channels to use, if I'm, like in this case, delivered several of them that are all sounding good. I try to listen for note stability. Like, can I hear all the notes? Okay, now this one is getting uneven. The bass line is getting lost. Is that just a frequency thing? Maybe it is. Then I can fix it with EQ. Sometimes it runs deeper than that somehow. Like the harmonic content is just not great, and it will create issues in how audible the notes gets. And in those cases, I don't spend time on it. Then I just reamp it with something else, or I use some software. I actually have a software that is based on my setup, and that has made life a little easier, especially when it comes to maybe mocking up a bass sound for creating the guitar sounds. Then I have something that is very close to something that I usually would like in there.
That's the one knob.
Yeah, it's the bass knob. Yeah.
And you use the Scar bass one as well, the Trondheim?
I use it very little, actually. I went a little back and forth, and this is what I've settled on. Mostly the Ampeg, and then I have the dark glass, just adding a little bit gnarl in here. And the Scar, whatever that is, sounded really good.
It's the Trondheim Scar bass one. It's a company from Finland who I think are a lot better than the dark glass. It's incredible.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I don't know about them, but this one is seeing some addition. Then there was one here that I could have crafted the bass sound around as well, but I choose not to. And in the end, it was just a different phase relationship that didn't do any good to the tonal stability of the bass, so I got rid of it. And then I do have my own, let's see, I have a version here that is not bounced. I usually try to, if I have like amp plugins running, I usually try to print them so nothing happens with them. But there is one here that I'm adding in for stability and maybe just, recognizing, and it is this bass knob, the STD Classic. I should also say that there is some like compromising processing going on to the bass as well. Usually I find my channels and I put them on, and then I would usually have some sort of this, again, old 80s, 70s maybe trick with ducking a compressor for the kick drums, which is hard when you have double kick drums. But I usually try to find a balance there, and sometimes I would like automate the that send, so as soon as there are double kicks, it wouldn't really affect, or if I have a different bass sound crafted for those sections. So I have here I have a ducker that goes individually on all tracks to avoid any latency that could happen in the processing stage. And then I sum up the bass, and there I am using some multiband compression around the fundamental frequencies and also around the treble of the bass. I usually see it like I'm able to push the treble of the bass if I also tame it down a little bit at the same time. Depends on the sound, of course, and how it works, but that's usually how it seemed to work fine for me. And with this little special plugin, I'm also able to actually duck the bass, not only from the kick that I'm doing like on a broadband level. Usually I can do that frequency depending also if I want to, but I'm actually doing some low-end compression based off the toms. So when the toms are active, that has a lot of low end, and this comes down to like a mastering issue, because if you master for CD, you usually want to get pretty loud with it, and then you would have points where you have distortion on the master. And usually tom fills, especially tom fills inside solos, are the most energy rich sections of an album. So I try to think about that when I mix, so I don't create issues for the mastering stage unless I have to. So every time the tom comes, fills the space with low end, there is a band here that goes down and like extra pushes down the low end of the bass. and that space fills up like masks with the toms. You don't really think about it either. So that's one of these like special things that I would say is pretty special for metal that I tend to use.
And are you using broadband compression on the bass?
No, a little bit. It does sound like there is already some compression going here. There is certainly some compression in my own STD bass. And then I am using a little parallel thing here again, similar to what I used with the guitars, but maybe a little bit more on the bass. There is this, Waves plugin that has a very interesting sound to it and an interesting distortion that I like to use in parallel with some chorus effect. And I usually use this compressor as well. And then I mix it in, so it's like some parallel broadband compressor on the bass. But that depends. These already sounded so good, so I didn't feel the need to do it, because if I would have used something else, then I might have put more broadband compression on. But I never do anything by default. Everything is always a matter of how does it sound? What do I need to do?
And any EQ on the master bus, on the bass bus rather?
Yeah, I do. Just a tiny bit there. I guess those sounds I crafted already there. And then I do finish off with a little bit of a limiter, just for those like resonance blooms that can happen in the bass. Because you play with the pick, and if you look at the waveform, you know how the notes goes like this. And one important thing for that not to be a problem is to have just try to find the best kind of source bass sound. Then most things will solve itself. And then I do some of that low frequency depending compression. And for that little last few percent, I shave off with a limiter in the end. So if I need to like quickly lower or raise the bass in the mix, I usually do that with my out ceiling on this limiter here.
Yeah. And can you just break the bass sound down into the individual channels and then rebuild it together, if that's okay?
Sure. I mean, it's almost only this one.
Yeah.
And then there is the dark glass. It's almost nothing. I think I'm automating that one though. Let's check that. Yeah, so on this middle section, I'm using a little bit more of it. But it's very subtle, to be honest. I might have been a little bit back and forth in the mix with this one. And the scar, same thing there. It had... It just adds to the lowest octave a little bit in a nice way. Again, I think I started off with that one a little louder as well. And then as it progresses, I realized that the best thing was to have it like that. And then I have the STD. And for this one, if I would have used the STD on its own, I would not have used much EQ at all. But here, since I wanted to use it as an addition to this one, I had to get rid of some of the low end. You can see that I've been really into putting down the different tonal points that I thought was not complementing the other one. So all in all, it gets a little bit more like engaging bass with all these on, but it's mostly that one. And that's not every day that I take a bass track that I get in for mixing and use it like this.
Sure.
So that was really cool.
If we could listen to the bass with the drums, would that be okay?
Of course. Let's just see how this sounds in...
And the kick drum, the way that you built the kick drum, did you use the sample from the kit used for tracking, or did you use your own sample?
My philosophy is always, I spend usually a lot of time trying to work with the real organic material as much as possible. Depends a little bit on the style, of course, but that goes with the kick as well. I think the dynamics that the kick has, you know, where you naturally play a little heavier on the downbeats, these things feels important and something that I want to like try to treasure. But I haven't sampled with the real. I usually try to work with the real stuff as much as possible. And for anything that I want to add samples to it, then it usually means that I need something else from the sound. So then it doesn't make full sense to sample from the session, right? It has happened, and it depends, of course. Maybe it's just a situation where it really needs to stay that sound, or the organic real sound, and you just need the little bit more consistency or fix some bleed issue or whatever. So in that case I would do it, but most of the time I would add something else. So in this case we have the natural kicks. That I've gated out a little bit to be able to use them more, but I'm using them pretty loudly, as you can see. And then I have a smorgasbord of samples that I add to this, which was bigger to begin with. Like I said, scientific approach, I usually put a lot of stuff in. If you're gonna use scientific approaches, you just need to be really good at kill your darlings though, because otherwise you will end up with lots of stuff. This is actually more sample layers, like the amount of them is more than I usually would use. I usually try to limit myself to maximum 2. But here, yeah, for some reason there were some other stuff that I needed. So if we add, I have added one kick here. For consistency, multi-sampled, so it's supposed to sound as good as possible. This is also actually a performance of 2 different kick drums. So every time there is double stuff in here, you can sort of hear do-do-do, like there is 2 kicks. So that doesn't take away too much from the original performance there. It's just the 1 kick. And then I have something else, which is more like wet, dry sounding thing for support. And this is a little bit more of an obnoxious sounding, kind of where you put a coin on the, I think that's actually a Terry Date sample that I'm using there. And this is also one of these more like larger than life kind of things that I just blend in there. So the sum of those samples are sounding like this. Pretty natural sounding still. That's usually what I try. And if we listen to only the original, yeah, then you can see that then you can hear that I have like almost a 50-50 blend here. Natural kick and the non. And that has just happened to be like that. Sometimes I would do 80% samples, sometimes I would do 80% natural. It's all depending on how I can get it, but I always try to use as much of the original as possible. But I know a lot of metal producers that would just go 100% sample on the kick. Personally, I don't like it. I try to use as much as possible of the original, because again, heaviness, it's in the expression. I don't want to destroy the expression. And if I do these sample things, then I work as much as I can to try to adapt to the original performance, so it becomes an extension of the performance rather than flattening it out.
So with the snare performance, we've obviously got these slower half-tone grooves going right into blast beats. Was it a similar approach with the natural acoustic recorded microphones as with the kick drums, the principal focus around there?
Yeah, I try to spend as much as time as I can, or use all my skill to try to make the snare sound come through as natural as possible. And for someone that is not into this thing that might sound like a weird concept, why would you not use the real snare drum? But a snare drum recording for metal, when you shift between sections like this and sections like this, take off some of that reverb here on the snare. There are some of these layered samples that doesn't have any reverb, so that this sounds more than what it actually is. Yeah, so physically it's really hard to play the snare with these various beats, like the blast beats, the on beats, and the more like 2/4 kind of beats, consistent enough and good sounding enough, because it's a lot of the drum sound is in how you actually perform and how you strike the drum. You get all these issues in terms of consistency, sound-wise, and level problems that you, to some extent, can manage, right? You can compress it, you can use EQ to make it sound a little bit more like you wanted it. You can put some reverb on to make it sound bigger, and then you can, yeah, automate all the hits up, so everything sounds sort of equal in terms of volume. But then you will get all these sort of bleed stuff, especially when you play the hi-hat. You can hear that here. And this is I have created a version here of the snare that is already filtered out the way that I want it. If we listen to the original performance, it sounds like this. Like here, for example, it's like more hi-hat than it is snare drum. It sounds basically like you have a mic above the kit, right? But it's a mic that is as close as it's possible on the snare, and this is just the physics of it. This is how it gets. And if you try to get rid of that hi-hat in the snare microphone, you will have side effects. So I usually try to find use methods to get rid of it without side effects taking over. We can listen to the one that I'm actually using in the mix. And you can hear that there's no way of getting around that. Every time you hit, you will sort of hear those things. So you sort of can gate the snare a little bit, and you can use different types of methods to do that. I have like 2 types of gating methods that I usually use for that. Then you can do other things. You can add bottom microphones. And for it to not just sound in the mix like a pop, 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 I usually try to work with some sort of extension as well. But then if you do that with compression or some sort of transient designer, you will run into a lot of these bleed issues. So what I usually use these days is some sort of, I parallel process the snare, and then I bring forth only the sustain, like this. And then I filter out the highs a lot, and then I mix that into my snare. That way I can have this like ring of the snare and the sustain without the highs taking over. And then when I sort of reach the point where this is how good I can get the snare into the mix, then I would start to add some support to it. And that's usually another smorgasbord of, that might sound weird on its own because it's like constructed for different, or it's there for different reasons. But I try to have something that sounds pretty natural and ringy and like airy, and that can sound good on fills. Sounds funny when you don't hear the context. Like an ideally recorded snare drum kind of thing that I like. Some others like different snares. I like when it sounds like it's ringy and a little beefy and snappy and nice. So this is one of my own samples that I add in. And then I could have other things, like I have one here that is more just for the ring. Actually not in this mix here, I use it probably a little bit more for the beef. I have also distorted the crack. So it adds like a beefy crack and a little ring. And then there is another one here that is more like just for that modern metal consistency kind of thing. And then there is an obnoxious one that I sometimes use. That is just to sort of compensate what I think or what I feel I lose when I get it into the mix and add all these rhythm guitars and whatnot. That is sort of to bring back a little bit that sensation. And these things could go up and down depending on the parts, and again, these have been put there because I tried it in the mix. It's like, yeah, well, no, not really that one. That one, yeah, maybe. And then I find some sort of balance, and then I go in and get, as I go along, if I start to, be annoyed by, I can hear that sample there, it's not so cool, then I would, bring it down or take it away or automate wherever I need to get rid of it. And then I usually have some sort of little crack sample like this. Is my spike. It's like one of these D-drum microphones that I recorded from that I usually try to have in as well, just to add a little bit of spike. I would say that if I would have to use two things, or if I only can use two things in addition to my real snare, then I would say this is the most important one. And the next important one is a pure ambient sample. With the spike and the ambience added to the real snare, I could work with that. The others are more for tonal shaping, and if I want it to be bigger. But since this song is a little bit, it's a little epic with the strings and stuff, it's I suppose some of these samples are more to support that kind of emotion.
And the track that was the ring that was a duplicate of the snare top, was that a transient designer that you used to get the ring out of it?
Yeah, exactly. In this case, it was the transient shaper from Solitude, but it could also be the SBL transient designer or something.
Sure. And then your approach with sends to reverb from the various snare sources?
That's just standard, old mixing console kind of thing. I have my auxiliaries and I send it to reverbs, and I do it on stuff that where it makes sense, usually the real thing, and then maybe I have 1, 2, 3 samples that I also think can sort of keep a consistency in the reverb that I use. Then if we look here where I have my reverbs for the drum mix, I have 4 of them for everything, and then it's non-linear reverb for toms, non-linear reverb for snare, and then like more of a normal, some sort of plate or room reverb for toms, and one for snare. So that's all I use. The non-linear one is like a gated reverb kind of thing, but it's not gated because a gated would need a certain signal level to trigger. So the non-linear is like a short reverb like this, kind of 80s reverb that sort of extends the shells, whilst the reverb is more the, the whole, the plate. And that could sort of also depend a lot how it is. This is one of these things that before I'm like fully ready with this mix, I might, the overall reverb levels might have seen some revisions as well, depending on how I feel in the very end. It's also one of these things that I sometimes try. Like I mix quite long without any reverbs, and then I add reverbs for the final thing, and then I might come back the next day thinking a little too much reverb actually, and then I go back.
And you've never gone down the Andy Wallace route of only sending to your verbs from the samples?
No. Well, I shouldn't say never, because I have done that as well. But I have the way I work with my snare. I don't have a bleed issue that bothers me, because that would be the main reason why not to do that, because you're gonna get this like aesthetical error when you hear the hi-hat like goes in the reverb. If I would feel that's an issue, then I would adapt and do it, but it's not a thing that I do. I usually work with it like that. Sometimes I do more the Chris Lord thing, where I actually send to reverbs from the overheads instead of for the room mics.
Yeah.
So it depends.
And on the subject of Crystal Lord algae, do you ever go for brightening up your reverb returns?
Yeah, those things can definitely have both. Here you can see I have some EQ going on these returns. I even have a distortion here from the decapitator, like just mixed in a little bit on the snare reverb.
Yeah.
Again, to create even more harmonic content in the highs, to avoid getting too much bloomy low mids, and yeah.
And the reverb times using on the AMX, that's pretty short, right?
I don't even know what this is, but it's I don't know what you mean by short.
Is it kind of like it's a pretty, because you were saying it's like kind of that initial sort of like,
Yeah,
not the,
you can listen to that if I this is the Gator one, or the non-linear.
yeah,
In time. And then the long one.
fascinating. What reverb time is that on the longer one?
Let's check. 1.63.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
that perception can be different depending on the thing, right?
Yeah.
But this is a 480 plate.
Yep.
And that's one other of those things where I'm using other 480 reverbs, for example, on the vocals in this mix. But then I use another emulation of the 480 here on the snare, so I don't like use the same type. Even if it's emulating the same thing, they will sound different. Just so I don't end up with too much the same, I don't know, frequency and phase content, trying to fight for the same space.
Do you also feed the reverbs with your kick as well, and your cymbals in this mix, or rooms?
In this mix, I don't. For the kick, I have 2 kick samples that does have some extra room in them, like this one. Where you can get the sense of space. And then there is one that is solely room.
Yeah.
But for example, on that slow middle part, that could be a space where I would actually put some reverb on the kick as well. So that happens, but not by default. And there are also real room mics in the mix that usually sound way smaller than people think, but once you get into the mix.
And parallel compression?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I usually take my whole kit and I send it to one track here where I can control the whole kit.
Yep.
I might also have a little bit of compression on that, tiny bit. Not always. And then I have what I call the add here, additional compression. That's how I grew up hearing the name, same as parallel compression. And then I could feed them equally here and just compress one of them, but because this is metal and because the kicks is a real issue when it comes to energy, I have a separate bus that I feed to this drum parallel. And you can see that here on my snare tracks, for example. They go to the drum bus, which is the main bus, and then I have a send that says drum add.
Sure.
And those goes unity gain there. As you can see here, the snare are feeding at unity gain, and the snare and toms would usually be what I feed unity gain. And then to defeat a little bit what the compression is doing, so it doesn't change my balances too much, I would go a little bit easier on, like for overheads, for example. It's like -7 dB here. Room, maybe even more, -10 almost, -9. And when it comes to kicks, depending on how much fast kicks there are, I would feed them a little less. Like a normal kick, -6 dB. The sub, there's a sub microphone on the real kick, -13. So I would be a little bit, have an idea of how much I want it to go into the compression. But I try to have that parallel compression going from the very start, because it will affect a lot of how I perceive compression, also frequency and balances. So I try to at least have some sort of mock-up parallel compression going from the get-go, and then I might do my scientific thing where I do a whole bunch of them and try what actually seemed to work better for this particular product.
Probably just listen to the drums without the parallel compression and then add it in.
Sure. It might also affect the overall room sensations.
Yeah.
It could get weird, but let's listen to it.
Yeah, that's quite significant. That's great.
Yeah, that is quite significant. And yeah, I would say that I guess I have some sort of rule to try to keep my parallel compression perceived as 50% of the sound. Sometimes that could be a little bit more, sometimes a little less.
And do your reverbs go to the parallel compression?
Yeah, that has been a little bit on and off for me. But lately, or like in the last few years, I usually do that. I send the reverbs to the same bus and to the parallel as well. And that's maybe mostly, and you can see I have them down at like almost 10 dB in the parallel. That's mostly because I want them to follow in case I do automation passes on these two things. So I don't want, if I take this down, the reverb stay or something like that.
Sure. Moving onwards, is it okay if we move on to your approach to the vocals?
Sure, of course.
Mix.
Okay, so the vocals here, they consist of lead vocals and an overdub that is singing like most of the time. The waveform is a little bit quiet here. One represents the original stuff that I got here for the mix. The other one, the actual lead tracks here, I have processed through a hardware chain that I have. Vocals is one of the last beacon of analog hope that I'm clinging on to. It's still very hard for me to mix vocals without some, in my opinion, important pieces of gear that I don't think they really got right yet in the software. And that's like 1176 and especially an LA2, which I think reacts completely different in the harmonic content generated. I have this like old 60s LA2 that I like to use on most of my vocals. So it's a chain actually that I've been using for this project with 3 compressors in a series that I run the vocals through, and then they are very much that I run the vocals through, and then they are much easier to mix.
Sure.
So You can also see here we have a verse starting out with a pretty sparse vocal arrangement.
From the solitude of Toaster's heart, race Jericho's falling wall.
Typical point where I would put a delay on, like responding, but I haven't done that yet. And lead vocal and the overdub, some delay that I'm using to create this little bit haunting sensation of the vocals. He's a German singer, right?
Yes, indeed.
He
Primal Fear.
He likes that kind of stuff, you know.
Yeah. Primal Fear and a side project called Baron Carter I've recently mixed, and yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And here it's pretty straightforward. And then when it goes into the chorus here, it's much more layered. We have a bunch of background vocals.
It's solitude. I was saved by your brain.
And here we can also hear that he's changing his vocal style. He sings cleaner. He's not singing as distorted anymore. And that calls for different processing. So that's why I've put that on a separate track. You can also see here that you're getting nausea from looking at my automation in terms of down to syllables, you know, whatever needs to happen for the vocal. I usually refer to it as you want to keep the cork floating on the surface at all times. Same with the breakdown, the soft part here, different processing.
The only way out is inside.
Alice in Chains kind of part.
EQ-wise, what was the principal challenges, and what were you doing EQ-wise to get Ralph to sit in those big quad-track guitars?
Yeah, I wish there was like a universal answer to this, but I think that I tend to use compression and distortion by compressing to the point where I put it in the mix as good as possible. Then I use EQ to fix the rest. So a big part of the frequency response and the EQ curve comes from compression. You can basically see it as if you compress with like fast release times and make it distort. If you use like pretty extreme compression, like the Distressor, for example. I have this like British mod switch on mine that makes it distort. These things just creates more treble and gets rid of low mids, and suddenly you have a mixable vocal track. Because if I start by trying to EQ and EQ and EQ, I will never end, and then I get this spiky vocal track that is really hard to get in there. So I usually try to retain more low end in my vocals and use that as a driver into, or as a catalyst, or what you should say. The compressor will react in a very different way if it can have all that low end in the vocals or low mids, and it creates more harmonic content, and then I get something that is easier to mix in. So usually that's what I start to do. I don't even touch the EQ, you know. I try to work with the compressors. If I feel early on that, okay, no, it's too dull, it's too dark, and the compressor is not doing what I want it to do, then I might like process with an EQ before the compression chain, just for the compressors to react the way I want them to.
Sure.
And then I'm usually 90% there. After that, I do the final EQ things, and once you have that like harmonic content in the vocals created by whatever distortion you use, which is usually the case as soon as there are distorted guitars, you should usually need some sort of distortion on the vocals as well, even though you can't tell that these vocals are distorted when you listen to them, but they are pretty gnarly. And that way the frequency spectrum of the vocals gets more even, and it's easier to use EQ, and you can raise the treble without it starting to sound too peaky.
Sure.
Stuff.
Did you brighten this Ralph up quite a lot on this one, or relatively subtle?
Quite a lot. You can see here that this is the full chain.
Yeah.
I haven't activated those first ones because that's where my hardware insert happens. So these two things here are put before my heart rate chain, which is nothing. This is just a gain, actually 10 dB that I wanted to push. They were pretty softly recorded vocals. I have this Soundtoy Devilark beautiful compressor just for a little bit of evening out and a little extra distortion. And then I go into this hardware compressor, which is the distressor into 1176. No, sorry, which is the 1176 into the LA2 and then to the distressor. I think that's the chain I have currently. And then it comes back, and then I have one more compressor. Just something to mildly even out on the post side of the tube compression that I have there. And then there is an EQ. Here you can see that I actually bring up a little bit low end on him. I have some resonances that I deal with here, try to focus up, and there are some issues here in this sibilance that I couldn't deal with de-essers, so I had to do some surgery. And then I boost very high end just to get a little bit more pop sound out of it. There's a multiband compressor that I try to, that work like, you know, organically, trying to tame wherever he's singing, and that works a little bit like an auto mixer. If I wouldn't have that one, these nausea automation would have been even more severe. And then I have some distortion here. Decapitator, old but brilliant plugin.
Yeah.
That I mix in. It's like not completely, and it's not so much either. And then I use like a brick wall limiter on the vocals a little bit as well, for sound maybe more than for level. And then there is a tiny de-esser that goes in here as well.
Excellent. And your approach with spatial processing to Ralph's vocals, is it a number of reverb similar to the drums and delay as well, I presume?
Yeah, I'm usually, personally, I usually get better results with delays than reverbs maybe. It's, I don't know, just personal preference. I usually think that if you put a lot of reverb on it, you just deplace it, even if you can use pre-delay and stuff on the reverb as well. But they're for different things. But for vibe and for this spatial quality, I usually prefer to use delays. And then I try to have some sort of mono delay. That is the first one, and then I add a stereo delay as well, and make sure that I have timings that doesn't clash at any point. That is a little bit more taily. Sometimes that would shift, so I would go a little bit longer and tailier on the center instead, and then a little faster response on the sides. But that's a fairly typical thing that I use. I also try to use some sort of like here I'm using a Dimension D emulation, which is the most careful chorus effect in the world, I think. It's very subtle. It's super popular among like R&B and stuff, where you want this, like, the lead vocals to sound like it's from everywhere. And that's the thing that I tend to go for, depending on how layered it is as well.
Is that the effect used on Rituals? There's a lot of stereo widening on Sakis's vocal on that album.
I wish I remember anything about that.
Could we just hear the vocal with just some of those delay lines you're referring to, the ends?
Sure.
From the solitude of Trojan's horse, race Jericho's fallen walls, my victorious.
There's a lot of artifacts here from him tuning, but that's how it goes these days. Especially when you sing with that distorted voice, it's really hard for trackers to pitch. If I would have recorded those vocals myself, I would have worked harder on getting the notes where they should be in
the first
performance.
place.
Yeah, exactly, because it's really hard to tune these things. Anyway, so this Dimension D thing.
From the solitude of Trojan's horse.
So I basically put it on a level where I don't notice it myself, but I can sort of hear the difference. And then there's a mono delay going.
From the solitude of Trojan's horse, race Jericho's falling walls.
It traces in the middle. Sounds like a lot now, but when you hear it in the mix,
From the solitude of Trojan's horse, race Jericho.
you don't really notice it at all. It just creates something. And then the stereo one.
From the solitude of Trojan's horse,
So I could either do like a panning delay, but I usually tend to do 2 times instead, 2 different timings that goes like one a little faster, one a little slower, and then compensate with the feedback so they end at the same time.
Sure.
And that together with the mono becomes then it becomes so many small delays that you don't think about them too much, especially not in the mix.
From the solitude of Trojan's horse, race Jericho's falling wall. My victory.
But if I do want a delay that I think about, not like these that just creates space, then I would I usually copy vocal lines or make a bounce of my whole vocal mix, and then I have that and can copy up to tracks that I have here that I call the spotters. Then I have it at different note values. If I want a quarter note, then I would copy it to that one. If I want a half note, then I would copy it to that one. And these could become like 6, 7, 8 different tracks depending on what I need. And I usually prefer that instead of creating a like automated send to actually have them like that.
So these are set up as delay lines and you just copy the vocal that you want over them. Okay, fascinating. Moving lastly onto your master bus processing chain, Jens.
So this could differ a little bit as well, how it is. But I should say that first I go to my summing mixer, and then I have this SSL compressor that is like standard, pretty standard rock setting, ratio 4, attack 10, automatic release. That's just barely moving the needle, you know.
Not even 3-4 dB?
Oh,
No?
I've never done 3-4 dBs. No. Well, maybe technically if you measure it, but the needle-wise there, it's like just a very tiny bit. Depends. If it would be like a rock thing, then that could be more like a mix into it. But here, when there are double kicks and stuff, doesn't sound good if you go too much.
Sure.
I prefer working with the mix in other ways. And then I do have an EQ as well here, which is just a little bit like 1 dB lift in the top shelving, 1 dB lift in the very bottom. That I sometimes defeat on the my next EQ here, but that's a fairly standard thing that I do as well. And then I have some EQs here, just lifting a little bit the top end. I have an MS EQ as well, where I lift a little bit low mid, a little bit highs in the side only, just to you know, listening to Adele, how those albums sound. It's like super wide in the low mids. So I've started to do that a little bit. And then this is a gimmick plugin that I just tried, which is like the stabilizer, a little bit like the one Gullfoss that you talked about probably.
Yeah.
And it is working pretty well. It's dynamically, so it does a little bit the same stuff that I usually do during mastering with some like linear phase multiband kind of thing. So that was something that I've been trying pretty recently. Very subtle. It's super easy to destroy your mix with that kind of thing, so I don't recommend it to anyone. But that's how it goes. There's another EQ here, which is a little bit here for the surgical aspect. If I do find some resonances, I will usually put it with this one. And this is something that I just put on for this mix. I have like a sound library of stuff that I like and stuff that I've done myself, and created like an average of them. And that average frequency spectrum is this big one here, and this is the current mix. As you can see, it follows pretty well, right? There's some resonance here. It depends on the riff and everything. And the more songs you put in, the more even this will become. But the this one here, the brighter slime color is our mix. So this is for me to check, and then I can do like super subtle. We're talking like 0.1, 0.2 dB maybe, like just an overall thing. This is something that I sometimes just bypass before I print it down. But for me to get a little bit better grip on what could potentially happen in the mastering and how would that potentially affect the mix, then I rather would want to know about it while being in this stage. And a little bit of limiter that I'm using to sort of crack the snare. This is also nothing that I actually print with. This is just for me to listen to emulate the mastering stage, so I don't come into a situation where I'm surprised by something that's happening there. And then I have another limiter, which is here solely for putting some extra dB up there for the clients not to start thinking why their mix is low. But this is still like 2 dBs far away from the final mastered CD loudness, but maybe approximately where it could be in a digital release.
And pretty much the last question, when we chatted last time, you were favouring an AD converter, clipping an AD converter for your loudness. Is that still the case?
Absolutely. That's how I master, but I always treat the mastering separately. This is not, what you saw here is not my mastering.
Oh.
There's some emulation of mastering. Some of it I would get rid of for the print, and then I would go into the mindset of mastering, or I would send it to Tony here to do that for me. And for reaching level while mastering, then absolutely we do the AD clipping. I still think that's the best way to retain your snare in your mix while mastering.
Jens Bogren, it's been an absolute honour and an absolute pleasure.
Thank you
so much indeed. That
Good
was
to have you
superb.
here.
Thank you.